Hey everyone, today I'm creating these square floating cards. You can't see from that angle, but they are lifted off and on transparency, which means it looks like the paper or cardstock is floating above the card. I have done these as a variation on the circle ones that I did previously. And the reason I've created this set is because I wanted to see if they were simpler than the circles, because I had non-die cutting transparency when I was creating the circles, and it made it really tricky to cut the circles out. It was the most painful part of the process, and as much as I love them, it just made me not want to make them again necessarily. So I thought I'll try doing the square size ones and see how I go. Now I am using, for the transparency, it is not transparency that is meant for die cutting. It is clear presentation covers that you can buy at a stationery store. I did that because it's the most economical and I love creating things in volume, and I can cut them very easily with my trimmer. So for a circle, I need to use a circle die, but when I do these with a square, it is literally just chopping it down with my trimmer, which works absolutely beautifully with the transparency or presentation covers. Now I have a whole bunch of little Ziploc bags that have scraps of different colors in them, and I have laid them all out on my desk. I have put double-sided tape on the back, and I'm literally lining up different colors super randomly in colors that I think are going to work together. I'm not being too perfect about it. And I do have a special pile on the bottom left, which is specialty paper. So you'll see me put in something gold or shimmery, or maybe something with a flock pattern every so often, just to add a little bit of interest, so that'll show up on each of the cards. Now, the width of the transparency that I'm adding the cardstock to is 2.5 inches. And when I finish one full strip, I cut it down so that I get 3 cards from each one. And then I do have a little leftover that is about maybe 1 inch or 1.5 inches. And I will show you at the end what I do with those to make sure that they don't go to waste. Now I have done, I think I did 7 or 8 strips of these, and I did trim some of them out of the video. I thought you might get a little bit bored watching me do the same thing over and over, even though I am a little bit fascinated by the different color combinations. I went with it. There are some that just look really unusual, and I just thought it doesn't matter. I'm just going to see what happens. And I'm really glad that I took a few risks, because some of the ones that are the wackiest color combinations are 100% my favorite in the end. You can see here when I'm putting them down that I'm leaving probably 2 or 3 millimeters of gap between. It's really important that you leave a noticeable gap, because that's what makes it look like the cardstock is floating on the card when you complete the process. If you put them too close together, then you can't tell that it has the floating element. So it does take a little bit of practice, but once you get into the rhythm, this is a pretty fast process. The other thing I'd note is that some of these are quite similar widths. I think because they've been trimmed off the side of a project, and often that's about 1/2 inch. But I did try and make sure I added some variety and had some that were thinner and some that were thicker that would end up in the same 2.5 inch component. You'll also see when I'm chopping these down that I try and make sure that the 2.5 inches means that at the top or the bottom, I'm cutting through one of the strips, because that also creates a little bit of variety in the width of the pieces of cardstock. If you are enjoying the video, it would be fantastic if you could hit the like button. That is how YouTube knows that you're enjoying the video, and it does help it spread to more viewers. So thank you in advance for that. Have you ever made a floating card before? I had seen them on Pinterest, but not tried them before I did the circles, and now I'm just completely and utterly fascinated. They look super interesting, and when you tilt them sideways, I think they just add a little bit of interest without being too fiddly, which is what I enjoy about them. I'm wondering if I could ramp it up and do other shapes other than circles and squares, so you never know, down the track I might create some more. I can guarantee that I am having fun using up my little coloured strips of paper, And maybe I can actually come up with some other design ideas to use these as well. And then they will all get used up and not be sitting there with me trying to figure out new projects and ideas. In fact, maybe that's a good video idea. Maybe I could do 5 ideas with paper strips. Let me know if you think that would be helpful. I will try and come up with something that is a little bit different than how other people have used their paper strips. You never know. I've now got a decent pile of little squares and I'm trying to figure out what to do next. I was surprised at how little I managed to use up of my little strips of paper. I had hoped to get through loads of them, but I did not in the end. What I did do though is I used a couple of Spellbinders dies to create some hello and some thanks sentiments, and I did them using the color strips that were wide enough so that they would match with one of the colors on the squares as much as possible. And so I have a big pile of those sitting to my left, and then I have some thin foam strips that I am putting behind the cardstock. Now, it's really important that these do not show or peek out from behind the clear. So I'm using different widths depending on the widths of the cardstock for each of the floating circles. Actually, they're not circles, they're squares. For each of the floating squares. Now, I do this by tearing off sometimes one of the little strips, sometimes 2, sometimes 3, and then I'm just putting it behind the correct width and doing maybe 4 or so of the squares at a time until I run out of the foam tape and then I grab another strip. Now, I am not a huge fan of buying foam tape because I prefer to use things that are recyclable, but I will admit that I did purchase some of these thin strips because one of the challenges I had when I did the circles was I tried to use a whole bunch of little foam tape squares that I already had in my stash, and it took forever to put them on the floating strips, and then it took forever to peel off the backing panel to stick them to my project. So this is far quicker this time. I highly recommend getting these little thin, narrow foam strips. These ones are from scrapbook.com, and I will put a link below. And there's a absolutely perfect. The backing paper comes off really easily. They're super, super easy to use. In fact, this one may not be from scrapbook.com. I think I got some from a store in Australia and some from scrapbook.com, but either way, I'll link to whichever ones are available so that you can get some if you choose to. Now that I've actually gone through and put the foam on the back of all of these, you'll see that I've already pre-prepared the card bases. I often use a Kraft backing panel, and I'll put a link below to where I get my Kraft paper from. It can be quite expensive in Australia, but from Riot Art and Craft or Riot stores online, you can get a big A3 paper pack or paper pad of Kraft and then chop that down to be loads and loads of these backing panels. So if you're like me and you like to bulk create and you like the Kraft tone as a backing color for many of your paper packs, then that feels like a really economical way to be able to do it. I think from memory, you get something like 8 from each sheet, and maybe it's a pack of 50, so you get about 400 panels out of one paper pad, and they're on sale. They're maybe $7 or $8, so super, super good value. And again, I'll put a link below. Lining up the squares onto the actual panels is really, really simple, super simple. You can see here that I'm able to pull off the backing strips really easily. And if you've watched the circle video, it definitely did not look like that. And I just had a choice to make about which way went up. I did decide to do horizontal stripes on all of these rather than vertical. I think that was just because if the paper was a little bit wonky, it's way less noticeable on a horizontal than it is on a vertical. So really, I just made a choice which color combination looked best at the top versus the bottom, attached it all to the card bases, and then I was ready to go. I did want to make sure that with these last few here, it didn't go to waste. So I just added some of the strips to the back of these, and then I worked out a way to use all 6 of them to create 2 additional cards. They were a bit of a hodgepodge of colours because they had come from different colour combinations and strips. But I figure if you're going to do something with random colours, then you can often make things work better than you think. So I just trusted my instincts, added the foam to the back, and then I worked them until I thought it was a colour combination that would suit. And I do think that being quirky with colours maybe adds a little bit of interest, especially to a really simple project. Now that these are all ready to go, and I'm trying to figure out the colour combinations, I do notice that 2 of them have pink and then the others don't. So I shuffle them around a little bit and then I put the 2 strips of pink onto the one card, and then it turns out that the other one is really greens, yellows and browns, which all matches really nicely. So other than the pop of teal on the right hand side, there's nothing really too crazy about those colour combinations that sets them apart from all the rest that I created. Now that I'm going to attach all of the sentiments to these, I started organizing them into color family. So you can see the ones on the left have pink, the other ones on the right don't, and then the first few there really do have browns and oranges. This just means that when I'm sorting through these sentiments that, as I said before, were cut from leftover cardstock from the same bundle, it means that I'm going to have an easier time. If I find a color combination that's working, I can just add additional ones onto these. Now you can see I've lined them all up, and then I just go through one by one and add some of my Burley art glue on the back and then line them up just where it makes sense on the bottom couple of stripes on the square. And I will add that because some of these don't stand out very much against the colour on the background, I did change my mind after I was done. And what you'll see in the thumbnail and the photo at the beginning of this video is there's actually quite a few of these sentiments that are in white. And that was because I went back and I did some white sentiments and then I added them over the top of the colors where I just thought there wasn't a big enough contrast and the sentiment wasn't standing out enough for my liking. So I would say that I probably did that with about 50% of the cards maybe, and I really preferred the result in the end. It just made it really easy to read the sentiment, and I thought those cards are going to be much more impactful when they're sent to a recipient. I am really curious as to if you prefer the circle floating cards or the square floating cards. So maybe drop a comment in the comment section below. I have also put another video here that I think you might enjoy. Have a great day.